Well, thank you. Hello. Thanks for joining us again on this week's Digital Town Hall Conversation. Today I'm joined by two veterans to talk about veterans issues and programs available to veterans in the state of Vermont, and also some of the issues that might be in front of the legislature that might affect veterans. And I'm going to introduce the two of you and ask you a brief question. But we have Robert Burke, who is the Director of the State Office of Veterans Affairs, and we also have Representative Troiano, who is Vice Chair of the House Committee on General Housing and Military Affairs. Both are veterans, and I want to thank you both for your service to our state and country. I thought I would ask if you're open to sharing a little bit about your service. A lot of folks don't always even know what people do in service anymore, and sometimes we have to take away the myths of what service is and isn't. So if you each would be willing to speak briefly of your service and your life work and how it impacted your life work.
Sure. So I'm a 28-year Navy veteran. I retired in 2012, and somewhere along 2000 or 2001, we had decided that we wanted to come back here to Vermont and settle here. My wife's family had been here for quite a while.
Were you also from Vermont originally?
No, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Massachusetts.
Okay.
And so during my 28 years, I did 15 years active duty and 13 years reserve. Navy, I was diving and salvage, explosive ordnance management from weapon stations, and then at the end I did counter IED work.
Wow. Sure.
Yes, a slightly different experience for me. In June of 1966, I was drafted into the Army, and I had just dropped out of college for the first time, and I went through basic training, and I remember very distinctly going and finding out what my military occupation status would be, and I was, I guess, surprised would be putting it mildly, that I was assigned to light weapons infantry. It was a time when, well, we all know that that time was, there was a build-up in Vietnam, and troops were being deployed rapidly from there. So I went to Fort Lewis, Washington for advanced infantry training, and by November 26th, 1966, I was on a plane headed for Saigon, and I was assigned to the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment as an air mobile infantryman, and we got in country and served for reconnaissance, search and destroy, and ambush patrols throughout my early months in country. I remember very distinctly as well when they came sweeping through our company area tent, and they said they needed volunteers for door gunners. Well, I thought door gunners, flying was better than walking, only to find out a little bit after that door gunners had one of the shortest life expectancies in country. Wow. But I began to fly. I flew over 250 combat missions as a door gunner, and traveled all around the country, operated up into the Cambodian border and down into the Mekong Delta, and all around the Saigon area. I returned in one piece, obviously, and I finished my tour in Fort Meade, Maryland. And it bothered me for many years, but it is part of who I am, so.
Yeah, thank you. That's a lot to share, and I know there are many Vietnam veterans and veterans of other engagements throughout the state who have faced a range of very challenging circumstances. And I think part of why we're having this conversation today is to make sure we recognize the risks that you both took for us, as well as the many thousands across the state, and to really honor that. And actually, one of the questions I have is, do we know how many veterans live in Vermont? I mean, I suppose it's difficult because you're from Massachusetts originally, you live here. Other folks may have been born here, served, and may still be here, or maybe in other states. There's obviously constant moving. But as far as how many folks are from Vermont, living in Vermont, that have served?
So just over 44,000. And so I use Department of Veterans Affairs data because they use a combination of Department of Defense, their own data, and Census Bureau data. So it's I found it to be very reliable. So just north of 44,000 veterans.
Which is almost maybe 1 in 9, 1 in 7, maybe 1 in 7 Vermonters.
Yeah.
That's I mean, I think that's really important to recognize. If people are walking down the street, they're just as likely over the course of a brief walk to pass someone who has served.
It's higher than the national average.
Higher than the national average.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
I'm glad you asked that, and I'm glad you had the answer, Bob. We had the folks from the Bennington Veterans Home in this morning, and that was a question that was asked, and they said, well, you probably ought to talk to Bob about it, because he might have the numbers, and here they are. They didn't have a record of the total number of veterans in Vermont, so that was great. I appreciate it. I'll take it back to committee.
Maybe it's 1 in 13 or 14. I'm trying to do the math on my scratch pad here, but it's still a pretty remarkable number of people who have offered their service to all of us. So thank you. And what are some of the ways the Office of Veterans Affairs serves them? And maybe you can also talk a little about what your office is relative to what the VA is, which a lot of people have also heard about, and that we have multiple different sort of avenues and organizations to try to reach veterans, offer support for veterans, both in physical care, I would say mental health care as well probably, and maybe even further job training. I don't really know. What's out there so people who know veterans or are veterans can share this with others to learn more about what you do.
Sure. So very quickly, what we do at the Vermont Office of Veterans Affairs, 3 basic lines of operation. So we certify veterans' eligibility for state or federal programs, veteran designation on your driver's license, veterans plate, the property tax exemption, fish and wildlife, hunting, fishing licenses, things like that. And those all kind of have a different breakdown of percentage of disability or open to any veteran. The second thing that we do is we have service officers that can help veterans file benefit claims and their families to file pension claims through the Federal Department of Veterans Affairs. And the third thing is that we operate the Veteran Cemetery down in Randolph Center, a very beautiful place. Mm-hmm. There is a distinct difference, so we interact mostly with the Department of Veterans, the federal side of Veterans Affairs, in filing claims for benefits. We don't have a specialist who can educate you on federal VA home loan guarantee or GI Bill benefits. I mean, just the post 9/11 GI Bill, there's been a couple of dozen updates to that in the past, 18 years or so. So we really stay within our lane, which are disability benefits, pension, assisting families, and then of course cemeteries.
So I think, can you help direct people to contacts at the VA, I know our reps, Rep Welsh and Senators Leahy and Sanders both have, all 3 have staff that certainly also help veterans. So just want to make sure people know you've got a lot of different avenues to find out more options and opportunities for you. And also on our own website, Lieutenant Governor's website, we have some pages of different organizations that are available for people to tap into. But you also, you and your staff, I don't know how many you've got, know some of those key touch points depending on if someone contacts
we
you.
do, depending on what,
service?
if they're looking for records that we don't have. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
we're trying to get some more information. What state did you come from? Okay, direct them to that state, direct them to the National Archives,
Mm-hmm.
Things like that, or specific sub-departments within the federal Veterans Affairs where they can go to find out information that they're looking for. Or maybe they're not eligible because of the limited service that they had. And then there's 211, there's Easter Seals, there's supportive services for veterans and families, a number of programs that are going on within the state that can assist people.
And Representative Troiano, in your committee, you cover a range of topics, so I want to make sure people recognize that the Committee on General Housing and Military Affairs covers a wide range of issues, from I think maybe even minimum wage, although that might go to commerce, I'm not really sure, maybe paid family leave, housing issues for Vermonters and affordable housing, to a range of different housing renter issues, and military affairs. So, there's a lot in that committee. Are there any bills or topics? I know the governor has introduced ideas the last few years. I think we've maybe partly worked on them, we being the political sphere. But are there any of those you can touch on that are on the wall or in the committee, sort of open for discussion, or things that are being talked about that would affect veterans specifically?
Sure. Well, I'll start with last year. I had a major role in college tuition for National Guard. That was brought up by the governor. It was put in by House Appropriations. It was removed by Senate Appropriations. It came back to Committee of Conference, and I kind of followed a few of the members of House Appropriations around saying, we have to do this, we have to do this. And finally, I was very happy to see that we did put about $484,000 into the budget in order to provide free college tuition for both a recruitment tool for the National Guard and for National Guard members who are presently serving. So I just yesterday found out a good piece of news that the program had been well used, and that it had acted as it was intended to, both as a recruiting tool and as a way for our National Guard members to get an education, a good education. So I was really proud of that work. We've been working on the Adjutant General election, which takes place tomorrow in the House, in the General Assembly actually. So we have been speaking with the candidates and seeing what we're doing, but I sponsored a bill that would actually put a nominating board in place so that people keep asking all of our committee, what is this person like? What is this candidate like? Who should we vote for? And we're not really at liberty to discuss that publicly. So, I kept thinking, maybe there is a way to vet candidates so that the General Assembly can get information about who they might vote for. So I did sponsor a bill, and it's in committee actually being discussed today in a walkthrough that would put together a nominating board with 4 members from the House and 4 members from the Senate, appointed by the Speaker and the Committee on Committees of mixed parties, 2 representatives appointed by the governor with prior military experience, and they would form a board that would vet candidates. It would require candidates enter into the race a few months prior to, so that this vetting can take place. And sort of like in some respects, not exactly, but like the Judicial Retention Committee, which I sit on, in which I think that the board would make representations and nominations or recommendations from the floor to the General Assembly prior to the vote, so that people can be a little bit more informed about who they're voting on. Veterans housing and homelessness has been an issue for me for many years. There's a wonderful project in Winooski right now that has apartments available for homeless veterans. But we took some information earlier in the session that indicates there are still about 150 homeless veterans in Vermont. And for me, that's not really acceptable. I think that we need to move forward and see what we can do with that. Bennington Veterans Home was in this morning to our committee giving some testimony. I sort of inquired about if we could squeeze some homeless veterans in there, but funding situations don't allow it, so that's not going to happen. But it's always on my mind. It's always on my mind in these frigid nights about how our veterans who served proudly are spending cold nights in tents and on the streets of Vermont. So it will remain a priority of mine.
Well, and I remember traveling to DC for one of the lieutenant governor meetings, and I was walking near the White House on some streets nearby, and there's homeless veterans right there on the street within eyesight of our nation's capital, or the presidential building and residence, and it just frankly boggles my mind.
It's amazing
that there are any homeless people in our country, but in particular folks who have put their lives on the line, whether they ended up choosing some of the most dangerous positions to be in or not, and that we aren't somehow in the wealthiest country in the world able to resolve that incredible injustice. Well, that rolls right into one of them, which you were just mentioning. I was going to ask, do either of you, can you express some of the challenges that veterans are facing in the state? Obviously, there's 158 veterans homeless on the street. That's about as significant a challenge as one can face, especially on these frigid nights, but in general, just food access, health, mental health issues. What are some of the bigger challenges that you see or that you hear about that either we're thankfully able to help with, or we're still seeing cracks and holes in the system that don't end up resolving? I don't know what you're seeing.
Sure. Just to kind of stay on the topic of homelessness for a minute. So since late 2015, 2016, there was kind of a cooperative setup as the Vermont Veterans Homeless Committee, and so we're working with the continuums of care, Balance of State, and Chittenden County, and it's really to get the word out there for identification, and then to develop housing plans. So I think as of there's a conference call this tomorrow afternoon. I think we currently have about 135 identified and that we're working with now, and there are I think 65 is the number that we have successfully found permanent housing for, or transitional housing in the past couple of years through Dodge House or the Veterans Place or Veterans Inc. Organizations such as that. We're an aging veteran population. Just over 50% are 65 years or older. Your era, the Vietnam era, is still the majority of that 44,000 in veterans. There still are some Korean War. We presented a Bronze Star to a 101-year-old World War II veteran 2 weeks ago. He's from East Hardwick. So there's.
Was that Curtis Whitewater?
No, Brown.
Oh yeah. Oh yes.
Yeah,
I know him.
Mr.
Sure.
Brown.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah.
He was a POW.
POW held by the Germans during World War II. So it's a combination of aging and then of course a rural state where transportation is always an issue, and so there are 6 community-based outpatient clinics that the federal VA runs. Yep. But again, it's finding reliable transportation to that. The VA has its own network of drivers, Disabled American Veterans, DAV handles the majority of that, but it's always tough. It's always tough.
Ideas on how to address them? I mean, is it just straight up money, or is it also efficiencies in the system, or I sometimes think between the federal government and state government on any range of issues, from education to the environment to Veterans Affairs. Do we have overlapping services, or is it pretty clearly delineated? You were talking earlier about the roles of the state Veterans Affairs relative to the VA, relative to others. Is there a good synergy with all the different organizations? I don't want you to throw anybody under the bus, but at the same time, our goal is to both make sure resources are available and also make sure resources are well spent and efficiently used to get the best bang for the buck. So,
right. So as a subset of the population, we're a smaller state. We have a smaller veterans population. If you were in Massachusetts or Maryland or Virginia, there are specific state-run, mental health, facilities for veterans. I mean, we're too small because of numbers. So I think there's a lot of synergy, but I think we each have our own lanes and are kind of careful not to stray into the others. Just because I can't delineate where federal resources are going to go, and feds really can't delineate where state resources should go. So I think it works. Always looking for efficiencies and to do it better, and if we can do it cheaper, that's a plus too.
Sure. No $500 handlers.
No.
Thoughts on that topic, or I can move on if you don't want, but I'm just curious.
My experience is that White River Junction provides really good medical care for our veterans, and I wouldn't criticize it in the least. I'm in the process personally of transitioning from my longtime doctor and softball teammate of over 30 years at the Hardwick Health Center to the VA because he's retired. So I'm using the VA now, and what I found is that I go to the Littleton Clinic, and for a period of time I saw 11 different doctors in 11 different visits. And that was disturbing to me because as I grow older, your continuity of health care really means a lot. So finally, I guess it was maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago, I met my present doctor who told me that he was told in the military that he should be quicker with his patients. And he said, I'm not going to do that.
Mm.
And they said to him, it's time for you to retire. So he's now in Littleton, and he bought a house, and he said, I'm here to stay, I'm your doctor, and I'm feeling good about it because I've seen him a number of times now. His interest in my health is not catching up on what he didn't know from my last visit, and really, I'm feeling really comfortable and good about it. So healthcare from the VA is, in my opinion, is working very well.
And even related to generally rural healthcare, you know, we're really struggling to have enough primary care physicians. I don't know whether all VA veterans go to specific doctors through the VA or whether many still have their own primary care docs, although if they're retiring and not getting replaced, that's even a hole that not only is impacting non-veterans, but could actually continue to erode or make it more difficult for veterans. So it's maybe just primary care docs in rural areas is an issue that I assume is a challenge. I don't know.
Yeah, and specialty care in, you know, podiatry, ophthalmology. I mean, that's a challenge across the state. I think where the VA has made some progress is in telemedicine. There's been a lot of successes with telemedicine, both physical and from a mental health perspective. That, you know, if you go into a community-based outpatient clinic and there's not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, you know, in residence, you know, within minutes you can have one on the phone if you are in crisis and you need help, on a video monitor and get some immediate help.
The good news, that's just a quorum call, so I think we'll be good.
Okay, all right. I was
No, that's not a roll call. For those that are listening, that little bell sound is something that tells people in the building whether the House or the Senate is supposed to go in session, and then often a different bell is a roll call vote, which we certainly would not want to keep Representative Fernando from being able to cast a vote. But I think we're going to be wrapping up in a couple minutes, so we're in good shape, even for the quorum.
Great.
But interesting, the telemedicine idea threw a thought to me, which is that, you know, as a lot of veterans, as they do age, and you're discussing the cohort getting older, whether or not there's almost prophylactic telemedicine or web medicine or opportunities for whether it's the VA or the Department of Veterans Affairs at the state level to have like a weekly conference call or video call that would say, hey, here's something you can do as you're getting older about something to adjust in your house or ways to watch thresholds so you don't trip or fall so much. I have no idea if that's already being done. It's an idea that's just come to me as we're sitting here when you talk about telemedicine, but that preventative medicine that often can save tremendous amounts of money as well as save preventable injuries. So something to throw at you to talk with your cohorts about whether or not there's the resources or the interest in maybe doing something like that. I don't know.
You'd be surprised how many times the answer is
that's true.
no.
Yeah.
So sending somebody to get
How
their
about
records at the
conference
National
calls?
Archives.
Those are probably hard.
Yeah.
You know, just people, you know, don't use it. Okay, well, here's the mailing address and here's what you need to send the request.
Conference calls? Even those would probably be difficult, how to dial into a conference call.
Well, a
Who
lot
knows?
of people just kind of shun technology.
It's true.
Until they're
Fair enough.
educated as to the value of it.
Right,
Is what I found.
Well, we heard from the Bennington veterans home this morning that they're going to experiment with some telemedicine in the psychiatric range, so that interviews can happen via Skype or FaceTime or whatever the media may be to help to overcome the shortage of psychiatrists in this area, which is really grave at this point.
Yep.
So I think they're hoping to see if they can get some help in that respect.
And my final question before we wrap up, you know, we talk about, you know, 1 in 13 maybe, 1 in 14 folks having served and being veterans. Clearly they have many relatives, but there's a lot of Vermonters that don't necessarily have a connection to the military or to veterans. My dad served early on in Vietnam in the medical field. He wasn't in combat. He also passed away when I was very young, so I didn't really learn a lot about his service. But for folks that don't have that direct connection, what are things that Vermonters can do, or even those that do have the connection, but they probably already have things they're doing or ideas, that folks can do to support veterans in their communities? What are some of the, you know, if you're talking to someone who has no connection to the military or to veterans, but they might say, you know, I want to reach out, but I'm almost embarrassed to not have a connection because there's such honor in having a connection that admitting you don't have a connection is dishonorable, and yet, you know, people want to honor and respect and help if there's help that's needed. What are some things that everyday folks could do? Certainly, I know showing up at the days, you know, there's Veterans Day, but along with Veterans Day, you know, or Memorial Day, or other national holidays. You know, July 4th, people often think a lot about our veterans, but more than sort of the days that are sort of, for lack of a better term, the hallmark days, on a day-to-day basis, or, you know, maybe on a monthly basis, some volunteer time. What are some of the things people can do?
Well, I think what have seen over the years has been a real interest in from a generation that just barely missed Vietnam, of what actually happened, what veterans went through, how it all came down. So, I mean, I've done a lot of work in the past in our community, speaking with high school students, church groups. Of course, I was part of that documentary film that brought me traveling back to Vietnam. Wow. In 2007 and 2008. I showed it here in the State House to a standing room only crowd last year. So there's this interest. So I think that interest in itself speaks loudly to veterans, that general population, that people who missed it want to know what happened, want to know what it felt like, want to know what the issues were when we returned. So that's, to me, has been pretty gratifying. I think, you know, people who recognize you as a veteran and say thank you for your service. I mean, all those little pieces really fit together to a place, for at least for me as a Vietnam veteran. I don't hold this animosity anymore, but coming back to an ungrateful nation was a very difficult chore. And so this is kind of, for me, over the 50 years, has really brought about kind of a reconciliation with our citizenry that makes me feel good, and as I said before, makes that experience as part of who I am, and feeling good about it.
So when, you know, I see folks in airports often traveling, or sometimes at the gas station, you know, in uniform, a comment of appreciation, which I try to do, is well received. It's not intrusionary. It's not, I mean, obviously every person is going to take it differently, but
yes,
as a whole, that's well received.
I would say as a whole, it's well received. And I think Representative Troiano makes a good point that, you know, his experience in Vietnam is significantly different than my experience in Afghanistan. So, you know, I think one of the biggest mistakes that people can make is that thinking that veterans are just one homogenous group.
Sure.
You know, we all have different skills and we have different backgrounds, and you know, we have different baggage that we carry as a result.
Well, and society has put different baggage on you. You know, if you're a World War II veteran, you know, or the Great War, right? And then, as you said, the energy around the Vietnam War, and then, you know, probably a mixed bag around the Iraq and, you know, Afghanistan situation. So, you know, that's sort of put on society based on broad conversations that individually is not maybe something you should have to bear on your shoulders. Well, I really want to thank you both. It's amazing always how quickly 25, 30 minutes goes by.
Thank you very much.
But this, I think, has been very informative for a lot of folks. I didn't get to talk about the expansion at the Randolph Center Cemetery. I don't know if there's a place to get more information about it.
Come down and look around.
Come down and look around. But obviously, having a place in Vermont to really honor our veterans if they want to be buried with fellow veterans from Vermont. Thank you for watching. Please feel free to share this with friends or others who might be interested in Veterans Affairs and services for veterans. Visit my Lieutenant Governor website for some resources, as well as the State Office of Veterans Affairs or the VA or many other organizations. You can view this both on the website and also on my Facebook page at VTLTGov. And please share ideas about topics, people you'd like to hear from in discussing the state of Vermont and the people of Vermont. So thank you for being with us. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor.